All right, hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's Common Ground. I'm Malvika Jolly, the events assistant here at the Rail, and today I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC for a conversation with curators Fabiola R. Delgado, or Fa, and Faride Mereb, artists Génesis Alayón and Miguel Braceli. They will be in dialogue with the Rail's designer and my comrade, Tuan Pham, as well as myself. This conversation really emerges and grows out of their exhibition Notions of Exile. It's a virtual exhibition and programming series that Fabiola and Faride have put together. So we'll drop a link to that in the chat. We're also so lucky to have the writer Luis Moreno Villamediana here with us today, who will read some works, both in Castilian and then in translation in English to close today's program. So really looking forward to that. To begin, I ask you to join me in acknowledging the Wapinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and the Shinnecock Indian Nation, the traditional owners of Lenapehoking, the unceded land and waters on which we stand. We also recognize that settler colonialism is part of the continual legacy of white supremacy in this country. And on that note, we'd like to take a moment to honor the memories of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, Nina Pop, David McAtee, James Scurlock, Jamel Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Rayshard Brooks, Rhea Milton, Dominique Remy Fells, Toyin Salau, Walter Wallace Jr., Casey Goodson, and countless others we have lost to white supremacy in this country. We acknowledge that justice will come from the streets, from the nation demanding accountability and refusing to move on until Black Lives Matter in the eyes of the state. Before I briefly introduce our fabulous panelists, I would like to invite you to join us for a brief moment of silence. Thank you. And now to introduce today's special guests. Fabiola Delgado is a Venezuelan human rights lawyer turned independent curator, creative consultant, and programs specialist at the Hirshhorn Museum. Yeah, it's also her birthday, so props to her. Her activism in Venezuela proved too dangerous, forcing her to move to the United States, where she seeks political asylum and dedicates herself to finding justice through thought-provoking art and cultural projects. She's also worked with the Smithsonian, the Embassy of Spain, Times Square Arts, the Center for Book Arts NYC, the MacArthur Fellow Mel Chin, and the Obama White House. Give it up for Fabiola. She'll be joined by Faride Mereb, a Venezuelan artist, award-winning book designer, teacher, researcher, and founder of publishing house Ediciones Letra Muerta. Mereb is a visiting scholar at Columbia here in New York, exploring North and South America's hybridity through its printing and book history. One of the younger artists in their show, Génesis Alayón, is here with us today. Génesis is a student at the University of Los Andes Art School. Her practice surrounds social matters through portraiture, bringing together subjects like absence, displacement, and belonging. She's joined by Miguel Braceli, a multidisciplinary artist working at the intersection between art, architecture, and education. His work explores notions of borders, migration, national identities, and socio-political conflicts. And he works on kind of geopolitical geography from a human scale and participatory projects. Finally, I'm joined by my comrade at the Rail, Tuan Pham, a designer and artist based between New York and New Haven. His practice weaves in and out of graphic design, looking for the poetic forms of the everyday while engaging meditative ways of making, familiar technologies and publishing. He's a badass motherfucker and he holds an MFA from the Yale School of Art 2020. I think Anya will be dropping, or one of my coworkers will drop sort of a link for full bios in case you want to read them. But yeah, we'd like to welcome you all here. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Oh, perfect. Okay, great. So before we get in, I kind of wanted to ask a question. So you had a talk last night that had Henry Rueda, and he came in and he spoke about sort of the architectural history of some parts of Caracas. And he said, I was really intrigued by what he said about the highway, that in Caracas, people use it as a public space, almost like a piazza or Spanish steps, even though it's sort of not a space meant for people. So, you know, the materials, the surface, everything is unfriendly. But for people who are, you know, from that city, he said it's part of our landscape, it's part of our imaginarium. So I was wondering, before we get into the exhibition, if we could kind of go around and say one thing that for you is personal or also exists in your imaginarium of life in Venezuela. I know it's a big question, but
it's a little charged because
yeah,
the imaginarium, that it's this unreal, or it's real but it's untouching. It's this intangible thing, and I feel like Venezuela as a whole, the country that I was born in and that I grew up, doesn't exist anymore. It changed so much, and it was, you know, attacked in the late 90s. That going back, I've been back to Venezuela twice after my imminent release, and it's just not the same place. The streets are not the same. The mountains look gray for some reason. The Bolivar, the currency, has lost all sort of logical value. So just knowing that the place where you were born doesn't exist anymore, that's what Venezuela is the imaginarium for me.
Faride, can you go next?
I think it would be really interesting to hear Miguel's input on this, since he's an architect. He's an architect, so.
Yes, like I think for all of us, it was very nostalgic, like to see and to watch like Henry's presentation, because you can see all the big movement and revolution, industrial revolution, and the big urban developments in the Venezuela at the 50s in Venezuela. But I think right now at this time, also especially from the Exile, you can see that not so proud, and you can be more aware of the failure of these structures, sometimes in terms of architecture, but sometimes also in terms of institutions. And I think that's something that somehow like I even miss in the presentation. That's why I think the question, because like the elephant in the room about this particular project that he presents is like its current program. And I think there's a strong correlation between its use right now and also the failure of its architecture. So I think it's very interesting to see this architectural project of Venezuela in general, not only through distance from other perspective, but also in time and within Exile. So it was a very particular opportunity for all of us to engage and be part of this discussion.
Thank you. Génesis, do you have any thoughts? If not, I'd love to pull up the oh, go ahead. Oh, one moment here. Let me.
Okay.
Perfect. Okay.
No, I'm okay. We can pass on this.
Okay. I'll pull up the exhibition. It's a virtual exhibition, and while I'm doing that, we'll sort of go through it. And I was wondering if Fabiola and Faride, if you could tell us a little bit about the origins of this project, sort of how did the idea come about, and how did, you know, a human rights lawyer and sort of a publisher and artist come together to curate a show like this in the first place? I'm very curious about that.
I think the project began with the re-editing of the book Private Life of Ragdolls, Vida Privada de las Muñecas de Trapo. This was my first solo show in the US. It was at the Center for Book Arts last year. And knowing Fa and her background, I decided to invite her to be a part of the programming that I hosted there with the storytelling, because the book is basically, it talks about literacy, the context of Venezuelan life, and to me, re-editing, since the book was first published in '76 and the author died on the same year, a way to revisit the country's situation and the decaying of everything relating to society and the economic side of the country. And that can be experienced or seen through the dolls themselves. So the dolls are only an excuse to like a metaphor of what the country has gone through and is going through. And in this case, well, I think, Fa, you want to continue? I don't want to monopolize the conversation.
It's perfect, because the project does start. This idea of notions of exiles begins with Faride's project and this story that's much larger than us that we use as a table. It's like, okay, this is the foundation of all these experiences that we're living in and outside of the country. When she brought me up to New York to help with the programming, part of me, you mentioned Malvika, I am a human rights lawyer, but coming to America, I actually expanded and I started working with museums and working in education and art curation. So I'm a program specialist at the Hirshhorn Museum, and my pride and joy is actually the kids programming, from tours and activities to the actual making of the dolls, which is what I brought to New York for Faride's exhibition. Using the dolls as Faride mentioned, as a metaphor for what the country has been through. When you see the dolls that were created in the 70s as part of the original book, as part of the inspiration for Aquiles Nazoa's book, and you see them now, you see all the time passing literally on the doll.
I think, I think something really important to mention as well is that most of the projects that I have presented, not only in shows, but in different types of books and projects I have worked on, are all inspired in literature, specifically in Latin American literature, and most of my publications are regarding Venezuelan literature. I think there's not only a lot of talented writers in Venezuela, but I think many writers, specifically women, have been left behind and ignored in literature history, and that's one of my goals to recover. In the case of Nazoa, I think he portrays perfectly, or at least in the imaginario colectivo, what is la Venezolanidad. So to me, this book was very symbolic to present in such a large scale as this exhibit. And having Fa join me with her perspective in human rights, she had worked at Amnesty International as well, I think nurtured the project in a way that I wasn't expecting.
And how did it grow from there? Like, can you tell us a little bit about how you connected with this particular group of artists and how you see their works in conversation?
Absolutely. Faride and I worked, I think even before joining WPA, we had the idea we need to work on something together beyond this one program, beyond this one type of thing. And we proposed this idea to WPA, Washington Project for the Arts, here in Washington, DC. They've been around for 45 years. They're a great institution to work with, and they push, they're always supporting artist-driven projects. So we thought it was a perfect place to nurture that idea. They really gave us the space and the budget to be able to bring other voices. We had planned to have a physical exhibition. This started in 2019, by the way, started November of 2019, with 100-word essay and see what can we build with it. And okay, well, let's do a traditional, we're gonna have an in-gallery exhibition, we're gonna have a library, so people can take books and read in the gallery. Maybe you can scan them and take some information with them. How do we make people participate? How do we make something interactive? And then the pandemic hit us. So it really made us push our boundaries a little bit more. And in a way, we were moving away from the traditional safe and comfort style that we knew of how to present an exhibition. And on the other hand, it really encouraged us and made us invite other people that may have not been present because they're in Venezuela and they wouldn't be able to come.
Yeah, I think the pandemic definitely pushed us even harder in let's say, enhancing the hybrid nature of the exhibit, because it's not only the different types of media that's been incorporated, or the ideas that we had to do on-site and online events, but for example, just to put like a simple example, the first event was a guided dinner with Mercedes Golib. And we were going to host that at WPA in Washington. And let's say we could have 20, 50 people on that dinner. We ended up doing it digital and shipping the ingredients so people could cook at home, etc. And I think that it was even better. There was 100 of us eating arepas virtually. There were people in Europe. It was 2 a.m. in Europe and people were eating with us. So I think in a certain way, I am grateful with WPA, especially for pushing me to pursue the project in a different manner. We definitely planned for a different show. We worked on this for over a year. And then with COVID-19, we had to, figure out ways to adapt, but I think it was for the best at the end.
Brilliant. I think that's a beautiful place to transition. So now we've sort of seen the way the virtual exhibition looks on the website. I highly encourage you to sort of peruse and explore it because they've put it together in this very interesting way. But now actually, I think is an excellent moment. Anya, if you can cue the slides, because what we're going to share is some of the work and some of the images that go behind and inform the works that we've just seen. And what I'd love to do is sort of maybe go, just talk about the work that's on the screen right now. So Génesis, could you tell us a little bit about your illustration, which we had seen, your image, which we had seen, and sort of some of the thought that came behind it as you were making it? What was the inspiration?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
Well, my work for the exhibition are 2 paintings called Perreras. And first of all, I think it's important for me to explain a little bit what perreras are, which in English is translated as dog kennels. And maybe at this moment you could imagine a cage or a vehicle that transports stray dogs. But in Venezuela, in the last few years, it has taken a whole new meaning. So I don't want to go too deep into the causes because we could spend here all day. But since 2014, Venezuela has had a fuel shortage crisis that in 2014 became very critical, to the point that the people had to stay in line for 8 days to fill up their car's tank, maybe 10 days, maybe 11 days, and this is still happening. Also, the public transportation system was very affected, so the people had to look for other alternative to be able to continue with their daily life routines. So, and that's the moment when we started to see the perreras in our streets. That is these pictures that we are looking at right now. So the vehicles themselves are trucks, cars, vans, pickups, any structure with 4 wheels, maybe 3, that has a platform on which many people can stand. And the curious thing, and one of my points of attention, is that these are improvised structures. So people add accessories such as ropes, pieces of iron, even chairs for people to sit. And for me, it is an incredible manifestation of creativity, but also a manifestation of the need. And I think no one should have to put their life in danger to be able to get to work or take their children to school. So for me, it's the same with the type of migration we are experiencing. No one should have the need to work 20 days to aspire a better life. And there are no guarantees. So these are the pictures we're looking at.
I mean, they're very moving representations, yeah. I feel like, but there's also something about the way I don't know, to me, I think there's something about the way you've sort of translated these kind of documentary images into something that's very, like, to me, stylized and graphic. And, in an uncomfortable way is a little playful with the tipping, but like such a tragic image.
Yeah.
I wonder, like, did you always know you were going to make them? And then there's 2 images separated, kind of fragmented. Have you been making more work kind of based around these? Yeah.
For me, it's really important in these images to them to feel heavy. For me, I have to feel the heaviness of the image because the people that is there they are not there because they want, they are there because they have to keep going with their life. So these people put their life in danger, and that's why I don't care about the background. For me, the background is in the faces of these people and in the color that I choose to paint them. Sometimes are darker and sometimes are more people in the image, in the painting, like the ones that I have in the exhibition. But that's why I take off all the background and I use whites, because I need the people to be the focus point, the focal point.
Thank you. Anya, I think we could go to the next image. So this is now Miguel's work, one of your works, and I would love it if you could maybe speak a little bit about what we're seeing on the screen here.
Sure. Geopolitical Game is a participatory project that has like several stages during 2020. It was in the context of an electoral year, the movement for social justice, and also like the increasing polarization in the US. I started the project also like in the very highlight of the pandemic as a way to engage with my neighbors and have some interactions when we're about to end the lockdown somehow. Also use this opportunity to engage in political discussions with citizens, no citizens, holding like blue and red balls and start like this debate about partidism and the elections. That's as you can see, like in the next image, it is also like an installation that we create with the video during the start moment of the elections. This was in DC with Cultural DC and curated by Terry Henderson. And it was a good opportunity because I think this project was extremely related with the context and being in the downtown of DC, staging these messages. It was like a good opportunity for me, not only to speak of what I believe about the correlation between polarization and the perpetuation of power, also to speak to Venezuelan in my own experience. Like for me, it was extremely impressive to see a government, in the case of Trump administration and his political campaign, from extreme right, and a government in Venezuela from extreme left, using the same political strategies, like using hate and division to a way to perpetuate power, especially their own power. And it was interesting because I think there is also like a different layers of that information, because we were, many Venezuelans, surprised about these things that were happening in the US so close to our home country. But at the same time, it was like an internal polarization between Venezuelans who was against the Venezuelan government, but also supporting Donald Trump's administration and against Trump. So that was another kind of polarization between Venezuelans that I think is a very interesting layer. So the idea of this participatory project was engaged in the discussion, in the debate, because I think that was something fundamental for democracy. And also in this case, using several mediums to not only the video, also the installation and the public art project to stage this message.
Thank you. I was actually wondering, could you tell us a little bit about Area, your performance that I think you'd done before you came to the US?
Interesting. You did a very good research, Malvika.
Because thank you.
I also mentioned one to my friend that actually I think this project in the US is the equivalent of Area in Venezuela. It is one of my first collective performance, and it was actually in a place similar to DC, like the political downtown and political heart of Caracas, so far also for Venezuela. And it was an open call to create a common area, a common zone between citizens from different places and political perspective or background. And somehow it was like a project that at that moment in Venezuela, which was like more than 10 years before now, it was a different moment, of course, in Venezuela. I thought like the government in Venezuela was using polarization as as a way to stay in power and as a political campaign. So Area was looking for the same, to gain people together with a message of unity and try to dismantle these strategies from totalitarian government, from left or right, to maintain their own power for their own purposes.
Thank you. Sorry. I feel like this is so interesting because it's you're sort of spontaneously raising up questions of like what I think of as almost the hybridity of sort of the North and South Americas. And I feel like this phrase is also in my mind, Faride, because of your bio and what you work on at Columbia. But you know, it is so interesting. So many of you have ended up in the United States. That is like the subject of the premise of the exhibition, certainly when you have such a large and overwhelming diaspora. But then there are ways that, right, the political history of the United States it is deeply, deeply entrenched and tied with the political history of Latin America. And there's also, to me, your work seems like you're thinking about that as well a bit.
Absolutely. I feel like since the very beginning, hybridization, the hybrid was always this fundamental word, this fundamental concept that we kept bringing up. Because it is, you know, what is a diaspora and what does exile mean when Venezuelans are forced to migrate versus the Venezuelans who voluntarily migrated. And that is a shared history that we have with people from all over the world, definitely with Latin America as well. Venezuela at one point was the Mecca, and it was the receptor for so many people from all the Latin American countries and European countries too, escaping war, Middle Eastern countries escaping war, South American countries escaping dictatorships, coming to Venezuela. And now not only native Venezuelans are forced to migrate for their security, for their safety, but then all the stories of the people whose grandparents or great-grandparents migrated to Venezuela for safety and for freedom are now digging through their passports, digging through the documents, trying to find that lineage so they can go back to where their ancestors came from.
To me, it's very, I think, two things I would like to mention. The first thing is that to me, it's very, very sad to see how Venezuelans are perceived right now in the international community. Because we received everyone in the country for so long. And when oil prices, when the oil boom was the shit, everybody wanted to go there. And now that we are in one of the worst situations and the worst refugee crisis of the America, nobody wants us in their countries. So I think the hybrid concept of the show is one of the most important aspects, especially because this is something Fa and I were discussing. It's not about coming to a new country, not only the United States, but any country, and trying to impose your culture and only speak your language if it were to be a different one, or use your codes and only hang around with people from the same community, or immersing yourself completely in the new culture and trying to ignore where you come from to adapt and basically survive. To me, it's about what results from the mix of the two cultures, the one that's arriving and the one that's receiving. And I just have like two examples that I think are super weird, crazy. I was invited to this conference in Madrid, and my husband and I were in this restaurant, and the woman, we wanted to buy French fries, and we say papitas fritas in Venezuela, but in Spain it's something like patatas. And I was talking to my husband, I was like, oh, vamos a pedir unas papitas fritas, and then I said to the woman, can I have some patatas? And then she whispered, yo también le digo papitas fritas, which is something like I call them papitas fritas too. And she basically told us, like murmuring, that she was also Venezuelan, but she was faking the Spaniard accent just to avoid rejection. So those little instances to me are the ones that make me want to have this type of conversation more often.
And with that, I would have to add, there comes the privilege of being able to mimic. You know, if you look a different way from the receptive culture, you can try to speak their language and you'll still be seen as another. I was recently reading Freidenberg talking about immigration as a single element that defines otherness. But in reality, it's not immigration that defines the otherness, is white supremacy that defines the otherness, because that is the main, like that is what's considered the normal, and everybody else, no matter where you're migrating from, if you are Black, if you are brown, if you look somewhere somehow different than the norm, which is a white supremacist style, then that is when we are seen as another. Some people, I have the privilege that I am white and I pass, in America, nobody would, really tell me or attack me in public unless I start speaking, unless I give my name. So there's a barrier that, like, there's one layer that I'm at least a little safer than many other people who are not. Right now, we're in a moment of a lot of hate and violence against our Asian communities inside of America, and even if they're natives, like they're born here, they don't have to be immigrants to be attacked. And still, our Asian brothers and sisters are being attacked and killed, and there's no way that they can hide that.
I'm curious, in this conversation about like assimilation, if you could expand a little bit on the idea or the term of like mestizaje, which from my outsider perspective, in a modern context, I understand it to mean a kind of like unity of race mixtures in modern Latin America, but I feel like that seems like a kind of term that could skew incredibly positive or negative, especially coming from the US perspective. And you write in the show that this is a term that's like deeply ingrained in the Venezuelan collective psyche. So I'd love to hear just sort of everyone's relationship to that term and whether you view it as something that's, as positive or negative, or.
I think it depends a lot on the context. I would wish to say that as a Latina and as Venezuelan, I come from a more equitativa, how do I say equitativa, Fa? Equitable society, but there's also a lot of racism in the Venezuelan school system and education system, mainly because we are colonized, and even at school they teach us that we need to be separated by race. I'm this percentage indigenous and I need to hide it so people won't judge me. In the case of Fa, she has her background in the Wayu community. Or in my case, with my Lebanese father and my father's side of the family. So I think that there are different levels to mestizaje, and there are different contexts on where you can be, where it can be seen as something positive or negative. That's why in the show's description, we say neo-mestizaje as well, which is a term Fa and I were discussing, kind of like a way to destigmatizar, like this, how do I say that in English?
Destigmatize?
Yeah, destigmatize, kind of like a way to destigmatize and, remove the negative connotation from it.
Yeah, with mestizaje is difficult because I do, we mentioned it's so ingrained in the Venezuelan psyche because we don't know any Venezuelan who hasn't at one point in their life boasted, being proud that we are mestizos, that we are mixed, we're a mixed race. And that is typically a way of assimilating to white culture and then not talking about the colonization effects or the effects of colonization. and the eradication of our indigenous population, of our Black population, it is a very mixed culture. It is a very mixed society. And it makes us, you know, it's like, oh, it's such a thing. But like, oh, café con leche, where, you know, we're coffee and milk. But it's a very light, you know, coffee. There's a lot of milk in it sometimes, it feels. I know when I first moved to America, I was a little darker, you know? And then a year goes by, 2 years go by, and then I started getting lighter and lighter. And that's something that's really funny when I meet other Venezuelans, like, I'm actually white. I was just perpetually tanned because we're in the tropics. It's summer all year round. So even when we think that we are a little brown, we really are not, most of us. We have been colonized, and we need to grapple with that concept. We cannot keep pushing it away and glorify our mestizaje, our mixing, by eliminating the other stories that are not being told.
Yeah, and I think something that's really awkward to say, and not to make everything about race, but since we're talking about mestizaje, is that I think that people with ascendance, is that a word in English? Ascendencia? A Spanish, Spaniard
Inheritance?
family, inheritance, have a easier time when they migrate, whereas people that have more of an Afro-Caribbean heritage have a harder time when migrating. Venezuela is attached to the South American continent, but it's technically a Caribbean. I would say we have more in common with places like Cuba or the Dominican Republic than, let's say, Uruguay or Argentina or Chile. Culturally, and yeah, our traditions are very, very similar to the ones in the Caribbean. So I think that people who have that upbringing from the Spaniard culture definitely have an easier time when they migrate. And it also gets mixed with religion. If you're either from a Catholic family or you had a Jewish or Muslim upbringing, it also affects a lot your migration experience, especially in the US and especially after 9/11.
Thank you. It's so interesting also because we're framing it. I think in my experience, it's so easy to think of migration as in terms of like historical phenomena. Like even with Venezuelan migration, I think of, okay, from this date to this date because of these issues, but really what we're describing, what it seems you're describing is like multiple immigrations, right? That you get a society that's composed of all of these different parts because of a colonial history, an indigenous history, you know, an Afro-Caribbean history, and then you know, you get all of this immigration into the US, but that is informed also by the inability to migrate or the inability to travel. It seems like, you know, there's so many layers of the movement of people here when you're telling the story. I don't know if that tracks for you, but Anya, I think we could move on to the next slide, please. And maybe, Faride, could you tell us a little bit about these images, these covers?
Yeah, these were part of the show at Center for Book Arts. I was doing kind of like an archaeology of the bibliography of Achilles Nassau. Achilles Nassau was born in the 1920s and he died in 1976 in a car accident. And he's one of Venezuela's most prolific writers, I would say. And in his simplicity and in his humble nature, I would say through his book covers, we not only testify that he wrote a lot, but we also do kind of like a transit through Venezuela's graphic history. Because in the context where he developed his work, there were a lot of artists, and it was also the beginning of what was considered Venezuelan design. So to me, all of these covers represent a testimony, not only of his work, but the graphics in the country. So that's why I decided to include it within the show, especially being at a place like Center for Book Arts, where I think the book in all of its forms have multiple readings. Some of these were designed by Mateo Manaure, for example, and even people like Leoncio Martinez participated in some of these, Zapata. So there's a lot of important material that's collected in these covers. To do the research, I spent some time with his widow in Caracas. It was about a year and a half of me doing research in his house, checking his archives. And not only this resulted from it, but also the book, Private Life of Ragdolls.
Anya, could we go to the next slide? And maybe we could go through these next few images and can tell us a little bit about this book.
Yeah, so this is the book that I published last year. That's the reason I got selected as Center for Book Art. I could go on and on about technical things of the book, formal characteristics that were hard to achieve, or typography, but I would only focus on context. I would say that not only narrates the decline of the country, but also it was a very hard research process for me emotionally, being in touch with his family, and also trying to achieve the printing and the production of this book from the US. And the book was being printed in Venezuela. So a lot of people thought, oh, you're doing that because it's cheaper. The truth is, it's not cheaper. The truth is, symbolically, it was really important for me that the book got printed there. And second, the master printer who printed this book, which is Javier Aispurua, printed the same book in year 76. So the first edition and this edition were both printed by the same person. So that to me was a very important part. And this is an English translation. The translation was actually made by Luis Moreno Villamediana, who's going to be reciting at the end. So that to me is really exciting.
Thank you. I wonder if we could skip, oh, beautiful. If we could look at the passports bound, which I think should be coming up shortly. Let's see. Oh, brilliant. Okay, so we were all really intrigued in the back end about this passport project, this bound. And could you sort of frame the project for us? Because when we were in the pre-check, something funny happened. I asked you about this project, and Miguel, and you said, "Oh, I want to focus on the artist's work," and Miguel said, "Oh, but this is it's the whole thing. This is like the uniting." It's really emblematic of the whole exhibition. So I'd love to hear really from, Faride, but more broadly from everyone about sort of this project, what you conceived.
I'm more of a backstage kind of person, so I will talk really shortly and then people can add something if they want. So this is my first passport. And what's ironic, that's baby Fadi. What's really ironic is that the first trip I made was actually to New York when I was about 1. And I have used this portrait and the passport in the past to portray different aspects of a self-portrait. But after I migrated, it took another meaning to me, especially with the fact that passports can't be renewed right now. Passports are not being issued. And if you can, it's really expensive or it takes a lot of time. And sometimes in the US, it feels like dogs have more right than you do. And all that enables you not having a documentation. So basically the Venezuelan government is denying us of our identity, and it's blocking the simplest processes like opening a bank account or having a driver's license. And the project began for people in the diaspora that were having the same issue, or people within Venezuela that were not able to leave. But with the applications, what I have noticed is that it's become so much broader, and there's people applying from everywhere, people running away from different places, people whose grandparents were in the war, people who were in the war. So to me, it has made me feel more like a part of a community and less alone as an immigrant. And it's definitely a protest project. It's definitely against the Venezuelan government and a self-portrait, but I think it opens up to something more broader that incorporates the mailing system as a form of protest. As you know, with the pandemic, people were voting by mail. It incorporates reproduction, which is a very important aspect of my work. It incorporates archives, which is the main part of my practice and my publishing house. And yeah, I would like other people to talk. I don't want to talk anymore. Thank you.
Sure.
That was something that from the very beginning, Faride had already made. You know, Faride had her passport. She had made a replica of her passport for her previous show. And I remember the first time I saw it, it just hits you. It's like, you get it because you've been through the same process. And it is a very personal story of personal migration in the Venezuelan state of affairs. The SAIME, which is the Service of Identification, Migration, and Immigration of Venezuela, which is absolutely corrupt. And the fact that we had a purpose and we can have our own passport and we can write our stories in them was really, really beautiful for us. From, again, it also, that's one of the projects that evolved with time. We started like, oh, if we have them in the galleries, can we give people time to sit and they can write stories, they can take them home? Is it gonna be just like a gift? And I think making this into a protest, using the mail and then opening it to the public to make a collaborative artwork, it became really much more meaningful.
I think what I love about this work is kind of that to me, it feels like an ironic gesture almost, and it seems to be asking questions about like the implications of citizenship rights or like who can get a passport. And in that way, it really does feel very much like not just one, but like serial acts of, you know, political resistance. But I guess I was also wondering about like, what is the gesture here? Because as you were saying, because you couldn't have an in-person exhibition, suddenly it sort of expanded and, you know, people are mailing in their requests, right? Or asking for the passports to be mailed to them. And I know you had it open to like the first 300 people, you know, can receive their passport, that even the way that you are servicing and providing these like alternative passports and the way that they are getting trafficked to people, it's like, so, you know, so different. And then on the other hand, it made me think a little bit about sort of, you know, the art world in a way, like who gets to receive a passport, who gets to buy artwork, that there's sort of the traffic of art in the world, the traffic of, you know, commerce in the world, and the traffic of passport is really about sort of the traffic of people and labor, like how people are allowed to move and work. I don't know, I guess I was kind of wondering how do you feel about this work, and like what is the gesture?
I want to make a clarification. These passports are sent free of charge to people on a first come first served basis. We open it to people from all over the world because we wanted to make it as free, as accessible as possible, with Faride and her team doing all the heavy lifting of cutting them, preparing them, mailing them, shipping. I participated with adding the insert, the paper insert, you know, all of that research is part of the artwork, is like the initial part of the artwork. Once they're mailed to people, it belongs to them. And I feel like that talks a lot about how Venezuelans and people from all over the world feel when they have finally access to a document of identity. In the Venezuelan case, not everybody has access to them. Only the richest will be able to afford a passport, because what is meant to be a right and what is meant to have a specific price, you pay a fee, a nominal fee, it's exorbitant with the corruption of the SAIME, the system of identification in the country. A passport for a Venezuelan person today can cost between $6,000 and $9,000 US dollars. When that's Bolivar, and they have to pay it in dollars too. They don't pay it in Bolivars.
Something really ironic as well is that when I launched the project on my social media, I started to get messages from people I didn't follow. Some people asking me about specifics on the project, some people asking me if they could pay me to get one, so like they could guarantee getting one. And I was like, art imitates life. Because that's what's happening exactly. Who can have, like, someone who has the $9,000 may not have a problem getting the passport if they're lucky, but when the minimum wage is 50 cents, how can you collect $6,000 to $9,000 to get an identification document that should be a right, not like it is your legal right to have identification. So, and other type of messages started to pop of people thinking they were real passports, and they're getting their hopes up, like, oh my God, where can I get mine? Da da da. Who are you? And that to me was very sad, very, very sad. Just because I accompany those people in their grief, because I don't have a valid passport either. And I think that's a taboo. Most people don't like to say that out loud. Like, I know I don't. And yeah, it's definitely, yeah.
Yeah, we're lucky too, because a passport means two different things for a Venezuelan that's in Venezuela and a Venezuelan who's outside of Venezuela. We're trapped either outside or inside, which is, it's funny too. We talk about the exile and the insile. I also don't have a valid passport. I'm requesting political asylum and I'm not able to leave. But without a passport, you can, as Faria mentioned, you can't open a bank account. You can't get a driver's license, different, rights on your receptive country. But what about the Venezuelans who haven't been able to leave because they don't have a passport, because they don't have a documentation? That is just really, it talks about the desperation, the messages that we receive, especially Faride, of people thinking, is this a passport? Can you get me one? Because I can't renew mine, because I haven't been able to see my family, because I really need to leave, or because I really need to return. It speaks of the desperation of the Venezuelan people.
Thinking about sort of the idea of citizenship and where you're residing and stuff, I'm curious, I have a question for Génesis. As I understand, you're a student right now, and amidst COVID in the US, a lot of like international students have had to been forced to return to their country of citizenship. I was just curious, like, if you are also dealing with any kind of like issues with like student visas, or the kind of precarity that comes with that, where you're forced to represent or make yourself in a certain way to be able to stay where you are.
Well, no, I'm in Venezuela right now. I'm actually in my family home, in my family house. So I have the privilege of being comfortable. But I know that a lot of students had to go back to their countries because the countries took off their visas. And that's really sad, because I know how hard it can be to be in a country like this, like be back in a country like this, when you come back, the country is totally different, and everything fails, and you cannot move, you cannot have a good, decent internet connection, like to keep up with the studies maybe, or to see your classes via Zoom or via WhatsApp, because everything here is really unstable. So I understand the struggle, but I don't know.
Miguel, I'd love to hear from you, because my understanding is that like international immigration visa and kind of the protected spot of the student visa might be themes relevant to you.
Well, I'm in the group of the people whose passport are about to expire. So I must confess that I am one of them as Faride. We're in the same team. Right now, well, yes, there is several ways of possible immigration, but also what is important is like there is the hope of a TPS, like a protected status of 18 months to be in the US without being deported. So in this case, for example, as me, if you don't have like a new visa or something, you could apply to this status. But it's something that is in the middle of the process to be confirmed. It's not official, but at least for the people who is right now inside in the US, it's a very hopeful moment while we're waiting for that. And also we like to say it about like talking about the games about the passport and Farid, which also for me is very special about the project. It's like it's very moving and touching to see how like Venezuelan people, we are all like building our own institutions. We are surviving, like saving somehow like the artwork, creating our own spaces, and finding a way to create like a parallel country besides the government, like these wicked nations around the globe. And in this case, what we just need to do, like to consummate this project, is just to issue our own document and being kind of like this independent nation, at least outside the country. That's what I think, like this project is very powerful in a very like authentic and sensible way.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think like the kind of fantastical implication of these passports is like, okay, maybe there's an alternative government, there's an alternative immigration, there's an alternative, you know, reality or future in which, like, I feel like each one implies a future that is all like completely different. Yeah, I also think, and this is maybe a great place to transition to the doll workshops. Fa and Anya, if you could, thank you, perfect. One thing that Tuan and I were really fascinated by is something about your exhibition. So much of your exhibition seems to be in the fabrication of the work and documenting the fabrication of this like new work. In, you know, on the scale of the passports that are getting requested and mailed and returned with stories, on the scale of, you know, these workshops like about the dolls, how to make the dolls in the museum with the children. We were really intrigued that a traditional exhibition might be, you know, a gallery space and the work is sort of installed, but this exhibition seems to be taking place on the level of like civic life almost. That, you know, the mode of this exhibition seemed to be almost making, not already made. So we'd love to hear from you, Fa, about these workshops.
Absolutely. I think you hit, you know, the nail on the spot when you talk about the creation of the exhibition. It's almost as if we're co-creating it with the rest of the people, with everybody that's participating. The very beginning of the exhibition, our opening was an arepa party, was a virtual arepera in which we mailed people the ingredients and also send them, you know, a PDF with instructions and other ingredients that they can buy themselves if they can afford. This one, you can use this other cheese. This one's cheaper. Use, you know, beans to make it ourselves. For the doll portion, which is coming also next week, the 27th, it's about giving agency again to everybody that's participating and then making an intergenerational conversation. I think it's important to bring kids to the table because the kids are just important. They're necessary. They will have the best stories and they're kind of unfiltered still. It's very pure. One of the projects, the pictures you're seeing right now on the screen, was of a project that I did for the Hirshhorn Museum, in which I trained two little girls, ages 3 and 5 at that time, Lila and Josie, and they actually went to the museum with me and we explored all the walls. We explored all the artworks. They got to learn about them. They did their little research and then they chose what they wanted to talk about, what they were really attracted to, and gave a public tour. We were expecting maybe 10 people, 20 people will show up. It's going to be a 20-minute tour. It's two little kids. They're not going to be. And eventually, I feel like 95 people showed up, and it ended up being a 45-minute conversation led by the children, which it blew our minds. We were excited, and we were obviously very happy that that was the case, that nobody got bored. including the children, especially the children. But then it gives a sense of agency to the kids and to their parents, a sense of trust that they can feel like, oh, the kids actually can take care of themselves. They know, they're paying attention to the artworks. If we see, there's, I think the picture before, the girls are, you know, opening their arms, and they chose these artworks because they like the colors, because they realize what the shapes are. This is Charlene von Heil exhibition Fire Eyes at the Hirshhorn Museum a couple of years ago. And they were really trying to get people interested, not just in the history of the artwork and colors and design and schemes, but to actually make the shapes. Can you all, you know, make this? Can you look at from a lower perspective? At one point, everybody was just sitting on the floor because we were trying to see the artworks as the kids. And now for the case of Notions of Exiles, we really wanted to bring that up and not just tell the stories. We're using Achilles Nasoa's book, or Faride's rendition of the Achilles Nasoa book, and we're having a story time, something that is very necessary also in time of a pandemic. Parents and caregivers need, you know, a little break, and we'll be there to assist and talk and read a story, in, you know, interrogating and asking questions, being, you know, very participatory, but then creating a doll is a way for the kids to assert their identity, because they will create whatever they want. Even if we give them instructions of cut it like this and put hair, they will actually create what's in their heart and in their imagination. And by doing that, we're inviting the parents to be part of the conversation, talk about what kind of doll did you have when you were a kid? Did you even have a doll? Did you play with dolls, or did you play with a ball or with rockets? There's something really beautiful of seeing the parents or the caregivers interacting with their kids and creating a story that's larger. We can talk about our ancestry, we can talk about the legacy, and we're bringing definitely the stories of migration, because in America, unless you're Native American, then you're an immigrant at some point in your life, at some point in your family history. So we're really trying to bring those stories to life and let the kids assert themselves through the doll making.
Such a sweet series of images. We had something in the chat that came in that in the future we only want to see museum docents who are children giving guided tours. This has been beautiful. Thank you all so much. I guess in closing, I'd love to ask, what do you see as the future? I'd like to ask everyone, actually, what do you see as the future of your work inside this exhibition, outside of this exhibition, but also what do you all see as the future of this project? Is it now that it's virtual, is it going to be an ongoing thing? And if you want to talk about some of your upcoming programming, that would be wonderful.
I'll start
Okay.
Who wants to go first?
Don't all fight.
Fa, go ahead.
Our ideas of this project, not just because of the nature that now it's virtual, I think it makes it more accessible now. It's like, if we had it in a physical location, only a certain amount of people, and maybe just from this region, would have been able to see it. So we're definitely really happy that it turned virtual. And in the exhibition, we bought the domain. We can make it last as long as we want to. That's definitely in the works of letting it at least a year, and we're going to continue adding to it. We're thinking this is also an exhibition that can travel. Now that it's packaged so beautifully in a web platform that Samuel Gonzalez designed. By the way, I saw him in the audience. Yay, Samuel. This is something that we can package and bring to other museums, either virtually, other institutions, or just keeping it free, open to the public, because why not? Now we can.
And I think something really important is that there are more artists involved within the show. Not all of them could come today, but the virtual exhibit also incorporates work from Diana Lopez, which we saw at the beginning, and Samuel Gonzalez, who not only participated with photographs and designed the website, He's also my wonderful husband. And I think that I would like to think that each one of the people who participated with a passport and their migration story or their family's migration story is a part of the exhibit as well. So it's a collective show of more than 300 people, or at least that's how we would like to see it. And in the future of the show and the project, I not only see it as iterating in other spaces or other countries, I wish to continue the passport project. I'm looking for ways to make at least 100 or 200 more for each season this year. And we'll see how that goes, because it's a very time consuming and it's a lot of hands-on work to produce the passport. So I will see how that goes. But I would definitely like to have more people join. There's a lot of people. I have like a wait list of people that have wrote to me, and I'm thinking of opening a form as well so people can digitally fill out their story, put their address, and when the time comes, if it's possible to make more passports, have those shipped to them, because I don't want to leave anyone out if possible.
I love that. I know this is kind of a trick question because I said that was the last one, but I'm so curious if you had, it seems like, you know, as you make the process of distributing these passports kind of digital and more formalized, like if you had to ask do a passport citizenship interview, what would you ask of these people?
That's a very difficult question. I would like to say that I have more experience in citizenship issues. I'm on my way to become a U.S. citizen, hopefully. I think so far the dialogue or the conversation has been not simultaneous. It has been the person writes to me, I process that information. Sometimes I reach out, sometimes I don't. And it's been really hard to see people that I know that are within my circle or have been my students, and they have written stuff in their forms that have been shocking to me. And I have found out that I have more in common with people around me that I have thought. So maybe asking these people questions about citizenship could also be kind of like a projection of what I would like to be asked or what I would ask myself, because I'm in the same process. Like, I don't see the project from the outside. I see it as me being part of this, and we're all in this together.
It's so interesting, and I feel like in the last few years, I've seen such a rise in, arts or exhibitions that use tropes of like the passport, the embassy, the citizenship test, the this, the that, and it's quite a wild thing to see that proliferating as like the crisis of immigration.
Something that to me is really sad is that many people who apply for the passport are in Venezuela, because as I told you, it's not only a problem for those of us who are outside, there's also people trapped in Venezuela, or people who simply want to be able to travel for a conference, for education, or for whatever the purpose is. And I didn't have a limit on the countries that could apply, but unfortunately, I couldn't send the passports to Venezuela. I'm gonna do an open call soon. I have a list of the people who applied from Venezuela. I had several people reach out to me privately saying that there's several laws currently in the country associated with document reproduction that can result in my family, who is in Venezuela, having problems. And I'm not gonna specify what kind of problems, but having problems. And I don't want to get either the people who applied or my family in a terrible situation, because as we know, the Venezuelan government is authoritarian. So I plan to find a virtual outlet or a way that people can download something or participate on the website somehow. But as you know, we have our hands full with a lot of programs that are coming, even one tonight, this weekend, next week. So after the show closes, concludes, I will find ways to make everyone's voice be heard, and not only, you know, people outside of Venezuela.
Thank you for sharing that with us. Have you gotten any response on this particular show from family or friends in Venezuela?
I've had friends reach out to me and get excited because they thought I got a passport, and people getting excited because they thought that I was somehow issuing passports and they could. Yeah. Listen, my grandmother died last year and everybody was asking me, oh, what are you doing here? Why don't you go to Venezuela and see her? And I'm like, well, I could, but then they wouldn't let me leave, or they wouldn't let me enter, and they would. So there's the chances of kidnapping are very high, and basically retención, like border, no, la situación en inmigración. ¿Cómo digo eso?
The immigration situation in Venezuela, plus the
customs. Yeah, customs is a very sensitive subject. So I want to get my point across, but I don't want to get anyone in Venezuela in trouble right now. And those of you who are not from Venezuela and are not familiar with the situation, I encourage you to look at the recording of the event we had yesterday about the shopping mall turned into a torture center. So you have a closer idea of what kind of situation I'm talking about.
Thank you all for sharing. I think this would be a good place to move to the audience Q&A. Does everyone feel all right about that? Okay, so our first question will come from Mao Bayocho. And Mao, you should be able to turn on your microphone now. Aha.
Okay, sorry. I wrote it in the chat. I'm just going to read it out. Okay, it's about this question of exile, right? And the notion of exile implies a return, usually. But it is like really clear to me and a lot of the people in my sort of like Venezuelan migrant community that a lot of us are not coming back or cannot really sort of come back to the same circumstances, like the same community, because we're all out here. So I wonder what happens to the idea of exile once you don't have a notion that you're coming back or returning, when it becomes permanent.
I think it's kind of like Ithaca. I can't speak for everyone, but in my particular case, I remember that both my husband and I went through some terrible situations that people suggested that we could easily submit an asylum case. And one of the reasons we didn't want to use basically what we lived to migrate, because our hope was to come back. And after you ask for asylum, there's a really big issue of not being able to go back to the country. And our hope was to, constantly visit or return. Our migration was more of a work-based migration. And the ironic part is that with everything that's happened, we still are not able to return, even if we wanted to. I think it would have been easier to file for asylum than go through everything that we've jumped through hoops. No? Fases no. So we have a catalog of migration experiences in this show. You can choose who to ask and everyone will tell you something different. Yeah, but in our case, even if we wanted to which technically we cannot go back. So it's like, yeah, like Ithaca.
I would like to add, and then I do want to ask Génesis and Miguel to jump in too. This idea of exile, it's very funny because even the word means ex-souls, you know, outside, out of your soil, outside of your land. There's this like ghost of returning. There's an idea that you will have to return and that you will no longer be in exile. At the same time, you can be born in exile. You can live in exile forever because your land is not yours anymore. I think about, you know, people who've been displaced because of war, because of narco trafficking in Colombia, because of you know, even climate issues, who are born in exile, who are born in UN camps, who are born in refugee camps. Then your identity becomes this very confusing thing, like, oh, well, where am I from then? Am I from the place where I was born physically? Am I from the imaginary? Am I from the country that I'm escaping? Because for some reason, if I go back, I'll be in danger, but that's still home. So it's a very interesting topic to talk about for sure. Miguel, Génesis, Luis, if you have something to add.
I can go.
I think, okay, thank you.
No, please, yes.
Okay, well, being here, I don't have experience as a living outside Venezuela, but for us, it's hard too. The people that stays here, but live their life missing their families, and we can see in the streets the absence of the people. And it's hard for us too, because there's also this misperception that if you go out of the country, you will have a great life and you will have a lot of money and you will come back with a lot of money, or with to heal the problems of your family. And that's also terrible, because even the kids with 10 years old or 11 or 5 years old, you listen to the kids saying, all I want to do in life is go to Colombia or go to Ecuador or go to Peru. So we have these identity problems. We are growing these identity problems, or this misperception about what being a Venezuelan is. So that's my point of view here.
Yes, I think it's very hard from both sides, inside and outside, even when I don't like this difference. Actually, I will like bet for the other perspective of like a single nation, like a liquid nation that is all over the world. And the goal is to be united, working as much as possible. I think like this project specifically is a good example of that, of how we can collaborate and create something together of one country, issuing passport, having conference, like being connected, sharing experience that what is happening right now in Venezuela, or sharing experience from the US, of how we can see politics from Venezuelan experience and perspective. So that's my way of like seeing not only like the Venezuelan crisis. I think it's a global perspective, even more after pandemic and in a post-COVID world, how we understand national identities and citizenship. And I think that's the goal. Like, I think right now, even the world will face like this possibility of inamobility of your own places or going back home, something that we weren't dealing before. And I think right now we are all looking for different ways of create something together as a country, as a community. And that should be like the goal, no matter what, and help us together, which I think is like a very important part of what Génesis are saying right now, that I think some people are even more productive and helpful outside of Venezuela. Some people are even more productive in Venezuela. So I think like the crisis is so particular, so unique, that we need different and very like special ways to solve it as we can, as a society, as a group. And this idea of like a country beyond borders, I think is something like very touching for me, and that's the way that I would like to understand and relate to Venezuela right now.
Thank you for that answer. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, we live in a very schizo country right now because we are like two very differentiated groups, like very different groups. The people who live well in Venezuela, which is a minority because of, I don't know what kind of business that they have with the ruling class, and the rest of us who struggle to live through the everyday life. I'm, for example, a university professor, and I don't want to even mention my salary, which is really, really sad. So we are constantly thinking about the existence of the foreign land, which is a kind of a wonderland, which may perhaps become the territory of freedom for us, even if we have to work harder when we get to that point. But I think the possibility of breathing some pure oxygen it's something that we need in our lives now. So I had a problem with the connection. I was panicking because I went out of the meeting for next to 10 minutes, and I thought, oh my goodness, I won't be able to read my poem. And it's really hard to go through this every day, having to plan for every little detail. I feel like I'm living in a Seinfeld situation without the fun. And yes, like the minutiae of everyday life is very exhausting, and going through that is really, really difficult. So the chance of migration is always there. It's a chance that we all want to take, and it might or might not happen to every one of us, but it's something many people dream about all the time.
Thank you, Luis. Our next question will come from Frant Papazian. Frant, you should be able to turn on your microphone now.
Hello. I guess I will read my questions since I wrote it carefully. Miguel, you said that both sides use sort of populism to gain advantage, and if they're both doing that, what's the way out? I don't know if this is on topic enough, but.
No, like, thanks for the question. I think that's a very important and even like complicated question, because I think when polarization is so strong, it's like different way, like a very difficult way out, even for society in general. Like I think in the case of particularly of the US in the context of the election, which was like the frame of this particular project, I was very happy to see the way that organizations, civic communities, like artists, were like engaged in this discussion and creating projects for communicate, share this idea in a very civic and organized way that I think it was very powerful. And in the same time also, for me, was also very impressive to say that I have a lot of like Latin American pride, so I'm always complaining about the US structures and a rigid system. But in this case, it was like very interesting to see how the institutions were preserved for the sake of democracy. And I think in this case, like everything relies in the institution, but also institutions are people, which is also like a very important reminder, like for everyone of us, like we are also the institutions all the time. But outside the people who work in the institution and support those these practices, like these other practices by artists, organizations, I think they are important more than ever, especially again in a post-COVID world where it's more easy than ever to connect and engage and share information. It's a good way. I think now, for example, in this particular case, the future of the project, it is not just about polarization. I think right now it's about also to incorporate justice and how we can like make that part of the equation. But I think that was like a very key part for me of the way that also this election was, or this campaign was made, that justice came after, like a major goal was made. And I'm very proud of like to see how everything turned on in the US, but also looking forward or see how this will evolve with more systematic and complex issues that are very attached of the identity and tradition and history of the country.
Thank you. Our next question will come from Norma Markley. Norma, you can turn on your microphone now.
I don't have a question. I just wanted to make a comment. I'm learning how difficult it is to immigrate from other countries in certain countries. And my grandmother emigrated here from Poland at the turn of the century. And during her lifetime, she sponsored a lot of families, and she provided them with temporary housing and helped them find jobs. And I only experienced this as a child, and I don't even know if something like that can happen anymore. But throughout her lifetime, she had an allegiance to her Polish roots. She was in organizations. She went back, she took gifts on the Queen Elizabeth. And she also lived during the Depression. So no one has it easy, but this Venezuelan issue is just so monumental. I can't, it's very hard to even absorb. So thank you. So my question is, have things?
Norma unmuted, but I'm gonna just ask her to turn her microphone back on. All right, so we got you back.
Faride, how did you get into the, how do people get into the country now? That's what I'm, if
or out of the country?
Yeah, out of the country. Like, I'd like to go to Cuba. I can't go to Cuba. They don't want, you know, the United States has an issue. They don't want you traveling to Cuba. It's very hard.
So you mean for like an American citizen?
American citizen.
For a tourist visa?
Yeah, a tourist, you can't. So I just wondered how people are emigrating now to the United States.
There's a lot of ways people are migrating, not only to the United States, but everywhere. The first one being by foot, and people are dying on the way. They have to walk for many, many days. The main or the most massive situation in the border has been with Colombia, but there are people who use that border as a way to get to Colombia and take flights elsewhere. There's people who do travels that take up to 2 weeks, migrating first by foot, then by a bus, and then by plane. This also cuts the cost and alleviates some of the situation with paperwork. And one of the most common situations right now has been with people going to, well, first, there's a huge issue with Mexico, because people from Venezuela, in the case of the US, people from Venezuela are seen as a threat in Mexico because the Mexican government sees us as trying to enter the US, using Mexico as a gate to come into the US. And so basically everyone, specifically women, are seen as targets for prostitution and drug dealing. And what has been the hardest recently is the situation with Trinidad. It becomes different levels of problems. First of all, with race. All the Venezuelan migration that has been coming to Trinidad, first of all, speak a different language, and we phenotypically look I don't even know if phenotypically is a word in English, phenotypicamente.
Yeah.
Phenotypically look very different from Trinidadian. So that's a huge issue against us Venezuelans. Second, prostitution, which is also a huge issue in Trinidad with Venezuelan women. And well, those of you who don't know, those travels are done by sea. So the Trinidadian government hasn't been updating their human rights laws too recently. So when people arrive, and the ones who are found are sent back, and since the boats are not in the greatest conditions, basically it's like a boat with a piece of gum to hold it together, people die at sea. And recently there was a case of a lot of babies, young children and women and men who died at sea because they were returned from Trinidad, people being deported from Mexico, a lot of xenophobia in Colombia, cases of people throwing hot water at Venezuelan immigrants because they're taking their jobs. And even like one of the hardest situations to me that happened recently was a Venezuelan immigrant got raped in Argentina and the feminist movement wouldn't defend her. And I think sometimes I feel like all the rights are for everyone except us. Nobody wants us in any country. So it's very hard to, yeah, it's very hard. In my case, I have to say I'm very privileged. I came here on a work visa. A company hired me and I came to the US to work for that company. And I submitted my paperwork to have my permanent residency and my case was approved. And I hope I can use that that privilege I had through my work to help other people. Yes.
Thank you for that extensive and informative answer. Our final question will come from Jess Chen. And Jess, you should be able to turn on your microphone now.
Perfect. Thanks, Malvika. I was really fascinated by the discussion on performing Spanishness or saying the right thing with the right words, with the right accent. And so I was wondering how to relate that to hybridity, or to what extent does hybridity require a kind of mimicry or even assimilation? Or would you consider hybridity and assimilation to be opposed as concepts?
I think thank you, Jess, for the question. The hybridity for us came as a solution to not be fully assimilated or completely resistant. Both of those, and including the hybridization process, come out of a desire to survive. You need to assimilate to a culture to be accepted, to be loved, to not be looked differently, to try to, and in most cases, to not be killed, to not be, attacked. But then there's another, side of the coin, which is resistance. I will only speak Spanish. I will only be with people who look like me. I will only live in this area, and I will never try to, make contact with somebody else from this big country or wherever I'm living, because this is a way of protecting myself and preserving my identity and preserving my culture. Hybridization is something that occurs naturally, and it's not just for the Latinos who are Latinx now, who, speaking Spanglish. Spanglish is a hybrid, and it's, it's lived here and in Latin America and in Europe if you speak Spanish. But then it's fun to see how, I think for me, the food is one of those early symbols or signs of the hybridization. When you come to a country and you don't have your ingredients or this specific oil or the tools, or maybe the weather is not the best to cultivate a specific type of bean or fruit, you make do with what you find here. And then you start making this mixes, and this is what we were talking, like this neo-mestizaje. We're remixing. It's the remix. That's what neo-mestizaje means. I just got it. It's the remix of our culture to try to preserve and celebrate our own identity without losing touch of the context and knowing that we live here now, we're going to have to compromise.
You said that so beautifully. I want to give an opportunity if anyone else on this panel wants to answer or respond to Jess's question on the remixing of identities. So if anyone has any thoughts. If not, we can move ahead to poetry. Okay, let's do that. So at the Rail, we have a tradition of ending our lunches with a poem. And today we're so lucky to welcome today's poet laureate, Luis Moreno Villamediana, who is also a significant part of this exhibition, and he can tell you a little bit about that. He is a poet, narrator, essayist, critic, and translator, as well as a professor at the University of Los Andes. Luis Moreno Villamediano has published a number of poetry titles. He's received the Jose Rafael Pocotera Biennial Poetry Prize, the Juan Antonio Perez Bonalde International Poetry Prize, and many, many others. Luis, take it away.
Thank you very much, Malvika, and thank you, Faride and Fabiola, for making me part of this project. And thanks everyone who joined us today. I'm gonna read this poem, which is can you hear me? There was a little problem.
We can hear you now.
Okay. It's part of the most recent book I got published. It was published and designed by Faride, by the way, and Letra Muerta. And the title of the poem is Shemot, which is the Hebrew word for Exodus, which is very appropriate for today's conversation. Shemot. Todos nos fuimos, todos armamos en pequeño un campamento entero como un juego de mesa en el morral, como una vida toda resumida como piezas de Lego que hacían más breve el dolor sentido hasta entonces y su uña encarnada. Y todos nos fuimos con la versión pequeña de esa vida sobre el hombro derecho, sobre los dientes de abajo como carne podrida por los días, sobre las piernas dobladas para caber de un golpe en la bolsa. Algunos nos fuimos menos lejos que la tormenta oculta que sabe deslizarse de frontera a frontera con todos sus botones de carey, a sentarse entre más edificios más caídos sobre pozos cubiertos de asfalto, donde aún varias algas se agitan. El muerto se largó a morderse un labio sobre una torre vacía casi, donde había 1000 larvas. Uno de cara larga se mudó al patio de cemento donde se hacían las fiestas, y el patio entró con su hijo, cada uno con familia, como los descendientes de la sola leche. Ardidos fueron los que al mar saltaron en un bote de remos mediano, sin señas de pintura de madera, y aquellos más tristes apenas cerraron la puerta y pintaron en la pared una curva verde como de un pétalo que cae, y sintieron en la carne el frío de sentirse en el hueso, como el que habla, que en inglés dijo que se iba, y él fue todo de personas de las que salen del cuerpo de Jacobo, entre lo más reciente o distinto para él, la comida comprada en las gasolineras, las sílabas más cortas de otra lengua, menos zapatos en los otros, con los pies más o menos desnudos, el arte de escuchar sus errores frente a la falla natural de quien se mueve allí como un originario, o el frío al final del año, con su espada, como cuervos vestidos con la lluvia detenida antes del suelo, or crows dressed up like rain before being icicles. Quien conoció incluso más lenguas fue como zambullirse. No se repite una fórmula de culto y se queda en la tierra a ver qué crecen más los campanarios. Y como que se vuelve con la ropa cosida. Yes.
Sorry, you froze, but please continue.
Yes?
Please continue.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
I'm sorry, there was a failure in the connection.
I'm so sorry for the interruption. Please feel free to continue your reading.
Y como que se vuelve con la ropa cosida, con la ropa detrás de los bolsillos, una foto velada, con la barba más honda sobre el hombro derecho, sobre los dientes de abajo como carne podrida por los días, sobre las piernas dobladas para caber de un golpe en la bolsa, todo ese que regresa más torpe, más callado, con más listas de palabras en uso, pero heladas. Puedo entrar a una casa igual de jorobado, con la miopía de siempre, adelantada por más vidrios demasiado gruesos, o hay que esperar los pitos, la llegada de una tarde seca, repleta de papeles coloreados, con letras muy torpes al dorso, como si hubiera escrito alguien de su vida con la otra mano inútil, o de la muerte propia desde un sueño. Todos nos fuimos, pero yo he vuelto solo. No tengo en mi carnet el código del tiempo que se leía antes. Llevo en los músculos como si fueran venas los paisajes de un lago y casas alrededor sin cercas, con buzones muy vivos, y como otras 1000 larvas, 1000 rostros, 1000 veces, no. Now I'm going to read the same poem in English. We all left, we all put together a whole camp, compressed like a board game in our rucksack, the stripped summary of our lives, the Lego bricks that made our pain and its ingrown toenail weaken. And we all left carrying the shorter version of such lives on our right shoulder, like meat between our lower teeth, on our legs folded and stored in a bag. Some didn't go as far as the hidden storm that slides beyond the border without losing its tortoise-shell buttons and swirls above buildings, falling on asphalt-covered wells where several algae are stirring. The dead one left to buy his slip on top of a partly empty tower where there were 1,000 larvae. A long-faced man named Jarvie moved to the concrete backyard patio where parties were held.
I'm sure he'll be back momentarily.
I think if we turned our cameras off, it would help the connection.
Oh.
Could we do that for like 1 minute until he finishes reading?
I love this, a collective action to restore connectivity. Luis, can you hear us? No, he just chopped off. Fabiola, do you have the copy of the poem he was reading?
I don't have it with me. I know that Faride does. We can share that with the audience. And just a reminder that this is what it's like to live in Venezuela. And he told us at the beginning that there's something that the minutiae, the everyday, the little things of just reading a poem on Zoom can become so burdensome for us who are still there.
Faride, do you have it easily available?
Yeah, but I don't think I would do it any justice. I'm sorry.
Okay. Let's see if I'll keep an eye if he rejoins. But in the meantime, this gives me an opportunity to say that if you're free at 7:30 p.m. tonight, I highly recommend joining Faride and Fabiola for the screening of a selection of Venezuelan experimental films and video essays focusing on the city of Caracas. They'll present sort of a candidly materialist document of a unique city, and Alex Chaparro will lead a brief conversation with filmmakers Henry Solorzano and Gabriela Garcia about the context, production, and significance of their work. I'll drop a link in the chat right now, and everyone should run to it and sign up. And coincidentally, Luis is back. So Luis, I'm asking you to turn on your microphone. And now maybe everyone, that's all right. Maybe everyone can turn off, we can all turn off our videos now to allow for the connectivity. And I think you were at the line about a patio.
Yes, would you like me to begin again the poem in English? Because I don't know.
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
This is part of living in Venezuela, so.
Yeah.
Luis, can you please, I think it would help if you turned off your camera and just left the audio. We all turned off our cameras to help with the connection.
Okay, I'll do that.
Brilliant. We were really enjoying
I apologize.
That's okay.
All right, I'll begin again with the English version of the poem. We all left. We all put together a whole camp, compressed like a board game in our rucksack. The stripped summary of our lives, the Lego bricks that made our pain and its ingrown toenail weaken. And we all left carrying the shorter version of such lives on our right shoulder, like a meat between our lower teeth, on our legs folded and stored in a bag. Some didn't go as far as the hidden storm that slides beyond the border without losing its tortoise-shell buttons and swirls above buildings falling on asphalt-covered wells where several algae are staring. The dead one left to bite his lip on top of a partly empty tower where there were 1,000 larvae. A long-faced man named Jarvie moved to the concrete backyard patio where parties were held, and he came into it with his child. We all came into it with our kin, like the descendants of the one and only come. Ablaze were those who went to sea in a medium-sized, unpainted wooden rowboat, and the saddest ones barely closed their doors and painted a green curve on the wall like a falling petal, and in their flesh they felt the chill of being a bag of bones, like he who said in English that he could buzz off and then left. He was a blend of people right out of Jacob's body, yet new, with different traits and costumes. For food bought at gas stations, the shorter syllables of a different language, fewer shoes, bare feet, the art of listening to his own mistakes, contrary to the common errors of those who feel at ease as native speakers, the cold wave that hits you at the end of the year, like crows dressed up like rain before being icicles. For those who speak in tongues, it was the same as plunging into a pond. You don't sing fan chants and then stay still watching bell towers expand. And what are we like when we come back with different textured patches sewn on clothes, hands tucked in our pockets, like a latent image failure, like the ruined picture of a man with a long beard swinging from shoulder to shoulder and meat between his teeth and his legs folded and stored in a bag? Clumsier, less boisterous, with more words to use but frosted words? May I enter a house poor postured as normal, nearsighted as usual, wearing glasses that are too thick? Or must I wait for the whistle, for the dry afternoon to settle in with colored papers filled with the gauche handwriting of those who wrote about their life with dormant hands, about their death and sleep? We all left, but I came back alone. The expiration date of my ID has passed. You can see a lake surrounded by houses with no fences and busy mailboxes through my skin, but no veins, thousands of larvae, faces 1,000 times reclaimed for 10 seconds. Call me Ishmael, and now hold my hand from the abyss. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Luis. You're such a powerful narrator. Yeah, bravo. Thank you all so much. That was the perfect way to close this off. I'm still in it. But I want to thank you, Faride, Miguel, Génesis, Tuan, and of course, thank you to all of you who tuned in today in the audience and the chat. I think, yeah, we're celebrating the Rail's 20th anniversary this year, so please consider making a contribution to our anniversary fundraising campaign if you would like to keep the Rail and our special projects free, relevant, and independent. I just dropped the link to the event and screening and conversation that begins at 7:30 tonight, that is being hosted by the Washington Project for the Arts. Highly recommend tuning into that. And please join us again tomorrow at the Brooklyn Rail when we'll be joined by artists Peter Sachs in conversation with critic and art historian Phyllis Tuchman. They'll close with a poetry reading from Daniel Bouchard, and that will be, as always, at 1 p.m. right here in the Zoom. Other than that, you can all turn on your microphones now, and please feel free to unmute. And I'd love to wish Fa a happy birthday. Thanks for spending
Happy birthday
today with us.
Happy birthday.
Hey!
¡Feliz cumpleaños! ¡Feliz cumpleaños!
Thank you.
Yeah.
Happy birthday.
And thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Happy birthday,
It's been a wonderful conversation. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Luis. Thanks, Tuan.
¡Cumpleaños! ¡Feliz!
Ay, qué noche tan preciosa.
Cumpleaños feliz.
Thank you all for joining us. Should we break for lunch?
Yes.
Let's go. All right, bye.
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 Bye.